Morning all, Brian S. Pratt here. Going to read chapter 2 of Fires of Prophecy, book 2 of the Morcyth Saga. Slight recap. City of Light fell. Michael's been taken into has been taken as a slave and is heading now towards the slave markets of Khorasan, deep within the empire. James, still within the City of Light, has recovered from his ordeal of battling during the fall of the City of Light. He met up with Jerome, Tanuk, Delia, and Cassie, and we're trying to escape. Cassie sneezed. I went through all of that in the last one. And now they are trapped within Jerome and Tanuk's hideout. He collapsed the entrance. There was no way out. They found on the wall behind a tapestry that had fallen an indentation in the shape of the Star of Morcyth. He took off the medallion that Igor gave him. If you remember from book 1, back in Trindle, after he dealt with the situation there. So he takes that, he puts it in there, and that causes the floor to open up and there's steps that go down, and that's where we are now. See, this is why he has the amulet. This is why Cassie sneezed to get him there, so he'll find that to use the amulet to put it down there. Yeah, people have hated Cassie for that and was mad at her for forever. But there's a reason for everything. And sometimes when bad things happen, it's because the gods out there need certain things to happen. And so they cause certain things to happen to get certain results. I mean, we don't think nothing of it, we just think it's natural, but sometimes it's not. Especially in this book, or this series. Alright, chapter 2. 14 steps took them down to a hallway that ran for 100 feet before ending at a door. They found another indentation carved into the door, similar to the one in the room above. Taking the medallion, he placed it within the indentation, and the door silently swung open. The first thing they noticed was a 4-foot-tall white marble pedestal standing in the center of the room. Centered on top of it was a small raised platform which looked to be made entirely of crystal. James entered the room, and a soft glow sprang to life, growing until it spread to every corner. It emanated from the very walls themselves. The room was octagonal in shape, with no discernible exit except the doorway they just passed through. They had just passed through. The walls were unadorned, simply plain stone, and the floor dirt. The only thing of interest in the room was the pedestal. James, Delia asked as she crossed the room after him, "What is this place?" "I don't know," he replied. "I've never been here before." When Cassie entered, she went to the pedestal, looking closely at the crystal platform on top. She ran a finger over and said, "Remarkable." "What?" Jerome asked as he joined her. "Oh, just never saw such a large piece of solid crystal before," she replied, still fascinated by it. Jerome turned to James and asked, "Do you think there may be another way out of here?" Shrugging, he said, "Maybe. After all, the high priest would have wanted a way to get out in emergencies." He examined the walls and floor, remembering his and Michael's time back in Merchant's Pass, the ceiling as well, but to no avail. "It looks like something rested upon the platform," Cassie announced. They came closer, and she explained, "Here, in the middle." She indicated the center of the crystal platform. "Doesn't it look as if something could have rested in there?" James closely inspected it and saw a place where something might have at one time rested upon it. There was an open space within the center in the shape of an inverted pyramid. Wonder what it could have been. Pressing down on the platform, he halfway expected something to happen and was disappointed when nothing did. So what could have rested on that platform? Star of Morcyth? Perhaps this was the chamber where it was kept when they had it? That's a thought, right? In fact, okay, big spoiler here. If you haven't read the but I'm pretty sure it's been a long time since I wrote this, and you guys are probably know this better than me. But didn't Michael go down there and put the star on that, and then open up a secret compartment, and he found the book of Morcyth? You know, can't quite remember that. I think so. Maybe I'll get to it before I'm done with the series. I could look it up, but I'm not in the middle of reading this. He turned from the pedestal and once more resumed the search for a hidden door. "What are we looking for?" Julie asked. "Something that will trigger a release and open a secret door," James explained. "Of course, there's no guarantee that there will be one." Cassie still looked at the crystal platform. Tried lifting it up. It easily lifted off the pedestal. "Look!" she cried excitedly. Everyone turned at her cry and saw her with the crystal platform in her hand. James rushed over and looked where the platform had been. There again was the indentation in the shape of the Star of Morcyth. Removing his medallion, he set the face of it within the indentation. The pedestal sank silently into the floor, while at the same time a section of the wall across the room from where they had entered began to rise into the ceiling. The opening revealed a crudely formed tunnel leading away into darkness. To Cassie, James said, "Replace the platform." He removed the medallion, then said, "Let's hurry. No way to know if it will close again on its own." Cassie replaced the platform and they hurried toward the tunnel. Jerome passed through as a section of the wall began sliding once more back down toward the floor. Simultaneously, the pedestal began to rise. She ran quickly to get to the passageway before it closed completely and had to duck her head to clear it as she passed through. Darkness closed in upon them when the wall slid closed. James made his glowing orb, which provided ample light to see the passageway. Taking the lead, he followed it for several hundred feet until it came to an end. There they found an old wooden ladder leading up out of sight into the darkness above. Jerome stepped toward the ladder. "Let me check it out." He disappeared into the darkness above while the others waited at the bottom. A minute passed, and then from above they heard him say, "Come on up, it's safe." James climbed up first with the girls following and Tanek bringing up the rear. Upon reaching the top, he found that they were in another deserted basement. Jerome stood before a door, fiddling with its lock. Coming to him, James asked, "Locked?" I don't like locked and locked. Standing before a door, trying to get it opened. Coming to him, yeah. Jerome stood before a door, trying to get it open. Coming up. How about coming up behind him? There you go. That sounds a little better. Coming up behind him, James asked, "Locked?" Without halting what he was doing, Jerome said, "Yeah, but I should have it open in a sec." Jerome used two small, thin metal tools on the lock. A moment later, there was a click, and Jerome opened the door. "Good job," congratulated James. "Thanks," he replied. Opening the door, Jerome stepped through, followed closely by James. Cassie and Delia soon appeared to join them. On the other side, they emerged into a deserted alley, wedged in tightly between two buildings. "Do you know where we are?" James asked. "I think so. If I'm right, we aren't far from where we can get out of the city." "I hope you're right," James said as he followed him down the alley. Following the alley, they came to where it opened up upon another, slightly larger one. Jerome held up his hand for them to wait as he peered around the corner. He then stepped into the larger alley and signaled for them to follow. He headed left, hugging the side as they made their way carefully and quietly to where the alley intersected with the main thoroughfare. He had everyone stop and then motioned for James to come closer. "Look down there," he whispered. Jerome directed his gaze toward a gate. "Yeah?" he asked. "Earlier, when I was out, I saw some workmen repairing it," he explained. "I think they damaged it. I think it was damaged during the attack. And they may not have had the time to fix it. If we act quickly, we should be able to get through before anyone realizes we're no longer in our hideout back at the park." "You may be right." James acknowledged. Once they realize we're loose, we won't stand a chance of sneaking out. The gate area, for the moment, was deserted. No guards, Jerome said. I think they're arrogant in their own superiority. They probably don't believe anyone would be foolhardy enough to try and to sneak out with thousands of troops stationed around the city. What's on the other side of the gate? A large courtyard that separates this gate from the one leading out of the city. What if that gate is shut and locked? James asked. Last night they left it open, Jerome explained. My guess is that they see no reason to keep it closed because there is no one to keep out. Yeah, who would be stupid enough to come visit? Exactly, Jerome agreed. Last night there were horses picketed in the courtyard that we may be able to appropriate if they're still there. All right, James said, you sold me. Let's not spend the night here jabbering. Let's get the heck out of here. Follow me, Jerome said as he took one last look around and then cautiously made his way toward the gate. The rest quickly followed until they were huddled by the gate. Jerome pulled on it, swinging it open, rusty hinges protesting. He pulled it just far enough to allow them to squeeze through and held it there until everyone had made it to the other side. He followed the last person through and closed it again until it once more appeared shut. James looked around the courtyard, but the horses that Jerome had mentioned were no longer there. The courtyard was not completely empty either. 4 cook fires were spaced around the courtyard. Groups of soldiers stood gathered around each. Pulling Jerome closer, he said, there is no way we're going to make it across without being seen. Maybe we need a diversion. Like what? I don't know, Jerome shrugged. What can you do? How about a big explosion with lots of fire and smoke? Jerome broke into a grin. I think that would do. All right, you 3 wait here and I'll be right back. James slipped. James slipped back out the gate and ran up the street several blocks where he entered a vacant building. After several minutes, Jerome saw him coming back and held the gate open for him. Are you okay? He asked when he saw how he was not quite walking straight. The spell took a lot out of me, he said, pausing before passing through. I should be okay in a little bit. Jerome closed the gate after him. Now see, I've been dinged before by people. It says, James is so weak, he can't do anything. You know, he does one little spell and boom, he's incapacitated. Well, yeah, he is, because he hasn't built up his magic muscle, so to speak, yet. I mean, later on, obviously, you guys know that he does pretty good, and he can do a lot of things. Plus, it's not really until book 4 that he really starts thinking about magic and starts working on improving and streamlining his processes. Right now he's got a lot of theory but no real practice, and so he's not doing everything the most efficient way, you know, let's say. Yeah. The conclusion of the blast knocked them down and a giant plume of fire. Oh, back up. Jerome closed the gate after him. They waited several minutes and nothing happened. They waited several more and still nothing happened. Jerome glanced at James and asked, are you sure you... Crumph! The concussion of the blast knocked them down and a giant plume of fire reached toward the sky. Several buildings surrounding the explosion collapsed from sheer force of the blast. The soldiers in the courtyard were knocked off their feet, and James heard cries of shock as they saw the sky light up with fire. Once they regained their feet, they raced off toward the sound of the explosion, leaving the courtyard empty. Damn, Tanakh said as the fireball arced high up in the sky. Let's go, James said. Jerome took the lead as they raced out into the courtyard. James's legs were a little shaky, but managed to keep up the pace. Debris hailed down upon them as they made for the gates. Dirt and stone pelted them as they crossed the courtyard. Dilly cried out when a sizable stone struck her left shoulder, knocking her to the ground. Tanakh came to her aid. Are you okay? He asked as he helped her to her feet. Not really, but I can make it, she replied with determination as they hurried to follow after the others. When they reached the gates, they discovered a section missing, allowing easy access to the outside. They passed through. I need a comma there so it flows properly. They passed through, then paused momentarily as men raced toward the city from all across the countryside in response to the blast. Staying close to the wall, they hid in the shadows as they worked their way away from the gates. Jerome grabbed James's shoulder and said, "Look over there." He pointed to a section of the enemy's camp off to the south. Scanning the direction Jerome indicated, James saw several horses tied to a tree near a group of tents. Fortune! And they were saddled. A large campfire burned in a pit near them, bathing the entire area in light. They had to make their way through a portion of the camp in order to reach them. With everyone running to see what's up in the city, Jerome said, "We should be able to get the horses. We should be able to get to the horses. We should be able to get the horses in a little trouble." "Let's hope so," James said apprehensively. "If anyone's looking when we enter the light, we could have problems." "We've got little choice," Tanuk said when he joined them. "We'll never get far on foot." Turning to Tanuk, James said, "Jer and I will get the horses. You stay and protect the ladies until we return." He waited for Tanuk's nod, then he and Jerome raced for the horses. When they got close, they saw that there were 7. They slowed and approached more cautiously when they neared the area illuminated by the fire. They edged around the fringe of the light, trying to get as close to the horses before entering the light and risk being seen. When they could hold off no longer, James scanned the area and saw no one was in the vicinity. Signaling Jerome, they hurried over and began untying horses as fast as they could. The horses made noise as they hurried about their work, and all of a sudden, the flap of the closest tent opened and a man peeked out. "What are you doing with my horse?" he asked with an edge to his voice. He exited the tent and approached them. He wore a plain, cowled robe with the hood thrown back, revealing shoulder-length red hair. His eyes were dark, and James saw anger smoldering behind those eyes. James glanced at Jerome, and they came to the same decision. Jerome's knife flashed in the firelight as they sprang to the ready. James took a stone from his pocket and, casting his spell, unleashed the magic as he threw it at the approaching man. The instant before the stone left James's hand, the man flicked his wrist. When the stone neared him, it hit a barrier and ricocheted into the night. Startled by the ineffectiveness of the stone, James hesitated a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. "The mage!" the man shouted, then his eyes got a calculating look. Jerome launched himself at the man, knives flashing in a whirling pattern. As if he was dealing with an annoying fly, the man waved his head. James felt a prickling along his skin as he watched Jerome being lifted off the ground and thrown a dozen feet away. Understanding came. He's a mage too. James directed his magic to the ground under the mage's feet and let it flow. Crumph! The ground exploded upward with incredible force. When the dust cleared enough, James saw that the man still stood, untouched. A 3-foot diameter of ground remained undisturbed beneath him. "Is that the best you can do?" the man asked with contempt, words heavy in accent. He swirled his hand and it glowed red, then he flicked it at James. A red light left his hand and streaked toward him, striking him hard in the chest, knocking him backward to the ground. As the mage made his way through the crater that surrounded him, he said to James, "I was expecting more of a challenge." How disappointing. James lay there unable to breathe, gasping as he tried to take in a breath. He saw a knife fly through the air out of the dark toward the mage, but it hit an invisible protective shield and bounced harmlessly away. Once the mage cleared the crater, he gestured with both hands while staring intently at James. Suddenly, James's legs cramped. He felt muscles knot and twist, bringing much pain. He cried out and in desperation cast a spell, one he had used many times back home, roleplay. Such was the power of the spell that it used the remaining power within him and left him weak, barely able to move. The approaching mage chuckled as he saw a clear, shimmering bubble appear, floating in the air between them. "What's that supposed to do?" He cast another spell and the bubble sparked as the fireflies were contained within. The mage's face lost his look of confidence and began to exhibit worry. The sparkles increased in luminosity, and the man's face slowly turned to a look of confusion. Jerome came to James's side. "Are you okay?" Exhausted from the spell, he said, "Will be." The effect of the mage's earlier spell dissipated, and the pain in his legs subsided. Jerome turned to the mage, and with knives ready. Hang on a second. That's not flowing right. Jerome turned to the mage and with knives ready, period. No, I don't think so. How about Jerome turned to the maids with knives ready. James grabbed his arm as he started forward. As he started forward. James grabbed his arm as he started forward, stopping him. Don't touch him or the bubble. Why? Jerome asked. Shaking his head, he replied, no time to explain. We've got to get out of here. Now, he shouted, then lapsed into unconsciousness and sagged to the ground. Jerome turned to the mage, who was shaking his head with a look of horror as he stared into the bubble. The sparks within continuously grew in size and intensity. No, he cried in terror, suddenly dropping to the ground. The bubble became brighter and brighter by the second. From out of the darkness, Tanuk and the girls came running toward them. Get the horses! Jerome shouted as they approached. What's that? Cassie asked as she made to approach the bubble. Get away from it! Jerome yelled. James said not to touch it. He hollered to Tanuk. Help me get him on a horse. When he came over, they lifted James up and quickly secured him onto the horse with some rope. How many times does that happen, right? Dilly dismounted and then looked back to the mage, who by now whimpered in terror. His hair, once a vivid red, had turned gray. He began to shrivel in upon himself like a grape having spent too much time in the sun. Jerome mounted and said, Tanuk, stay next to James and make sure he doesn't fall. He turned his horse toward the southwest. Stay close, and maybe we can survive this. He glanced over to the bubble. The sparks had grown until they now filled its entirety with a white light whose intensity was painful to look upon. The mage on the ground no longer moved and appeared dead. Kicking his horse in the side, Jerome rode through the camp, the others close behind. Out of the darkness, several men suddenly appeared. Holding on tight, he rode straight toward them, knocking them over. He looked back toward the bubble, and the light was now extremely bright, illuminating a large portion of the camp. He saw dozens of men running toward it, one of whom wore a cowled robe just like the mage had. They raced through the tent area and reached the far side of the camp. They passed the soldiers, but none seemed to notice. All eyes were turned to the now brilliantly bright light. The guards of the friends of the camp took notice of their approach and commanded them to stop. A crossbow bolt flew past, nearly striking Tanuk as they raced through. They fled into the dark grasslands to the southwest of town, leaving the guards behind. They didn't get too far before they looked back at the sound. Everyone held their breath in anticipation of what may happen. Then, boom! A giant explosion engulfed the camp, 10 times the force of what they experienced when that building blew earlier. They felt a concussion wave as it washed over them, as it rolled over them. Fortunately, they were far enough away that it didn't hit them with enough force to do anything, just caused their horses to miss a step. They paused and looked back at the camp, or rather, what was left of it. Reaching toward the sky was a massive tower of flame, the roar from which could be heard even though they were now far from it. Its base covered most of the camp. It was unlikely anything survived. They sat in awe as the flame punched through the clouds and then slowly dissipated. Slowly dissipated. Yeah, I got slowly twice. Hang on. They sat in awe as the flame punched through the clouds and then slowly dissipated, gradually sinking back to the ground. By the gods, Cassie exclaimed. They glanced at the unconscious James and then to each other. Tanuk asked, just what have we gotten ourselves into? I don't know, Jeremy replied, shaking his head as he glanced again at James. I don't know. Kicking his horse, he led them out into the grasslands. And that's it. That is chapter 2. Exciting. One of my one reviewer said that James is like a mass murderer who has no conscience and just kills it indiscriminately. And I would argue that James only kills when he has to. If everyone left him alone, nobody would die. But they don't. And so he takes out those who were going after him. He doesn't just walk down the street and say, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, right? He doesn't do that. He only responds to violence. And if people would leave him alone, there wouldn't be any violence from him. Now the bubble spell, that was something I did back in my Dungeon Dragon days. I had this this mage that was kind of a scientist too, you might say. I get technologist, but he was a mage, but they had found a spaceship, and Yeah, and well, you know, back in the days when they first came out, hell, I had a level 42 storm giant fighter with a laser rifle. Yeah, we had fun though. One guy even ran Inspector Gadget, if you guys remember him. Anyway, so I had this science, this technologist slash mage, and he was working around with the power of the spaceship, and he started realizing that, you know, you can tap into things, and so he devised a spell that when someone casts a spell, see, when you cast a spell, there's a conduit from you to the spell, you know, and in that moment there's a conduit. Now the bubble latches onto that conduit and keeps it, and then, you know, latches onto it, kind of like a virus, you might say, and attaches and then flows to the source of the power within the mage, kind of like what's a good no, I can't think of a good analogy, but yeah, and so keeps it open, and then just sucks every bit of it out, and then every mage around them that casts a spell latches on. Of course, he does that with great effect later on in the books too, but he doesn't like to do it because he knows that eventually that the bubble will explode and will kill anything and everything around him, and that's only a last ditch effort, and he wouldn't do that unless he actually had to. Now he does come up with leech spells that don't explode. Well, see, this one here, you know, the bubble draws power until reaching critical mass, and then it explodes. The leech spells just leech spells, and then see later on, he has leech spells that there's a spell here with a leech spell that draws power, and then like takes that magic and then transforms it into, like, there's this one where he does it and it's casting like thousands of orbs. Just you know, his glowing orb just forms, you know, that only lasts a few seconds. You know, it's like a firework display, but it dissipates the magic so it doesn't explode. But this one here, he hasn't gotten to that level of finesse yet. So he's just like a big barbarian with a club, just, you know, smashing Hulk smash. That's where he's at now, because he hasn't learned enough yet. Oh, also, this one reviewer guy, this one reviewer was saying, you know, he's a role player. You know, why doesn't he devise, you know, armor and you know, spells that detect things coming at him and you know, just automatic spells? Well, stuff like that takes power, and how are you going to power that? It's going to come from him, and if he had that going all the time, he'd be weak all the time. So he can't do it. Plus, right now he doesn't have that finesse yet, and for the most part, you don't need it. And yeah. Well, anyway, that's a little bit of the background. Tomorrow, my brother's coming into town. Personal stuff, so you guys can click on if you want to. But that won't stop me from doing this, because I'll still be doing this. And they like playing canasta, hand and foot canasta. So with 8 decks, so me, him, his wife, and my son will be playing a lot of that over the weekend. And then they'll leave on Monday. I'll probably gain 10 pounds because we're going to eat out all the time. But that's part of family, right? Getting fat for family. All right, chapter 3 tomorrow. Y'all take care. Gonna be a good week. Should be. Y'all take care.